to have Dr. David Schiffman with us. One of our volunteers, Shireen Gonzaga, who is helping with the online Zoom section, and she and I worked together on the shark jaw display out there. Again, that was a donation from Stephen Cunningham, a longtime supporter. She said, we need to get this guy. She's a follower on Twitter. Now, I'm older and I don't do the Twitter, but apparently you have quite a Twitter, like a Twitterverse or something like that. So his Twitter is it Why Sharks Matter?
Why Sharks Matter is everything.
Why Sharks Matter. And he has a book coming out through Johns Hopkins University Press called
Why Sharks Matter. You guys are getting the hang of this.
And we have a presentation today called
Hey!
Because as an environmental educator myself for a long period of time, and you go out and you talk about the wonders, it never fails. You're talking about something, well, what good is a mosquito? You know, why do we need, when the cicadas were coming, what does a cicada do? Why do we need them? So this is a good way, not only for you to answer the question, why sharks matter, but thinking about why everything matters ecologically speaking in terms of our big old puzzle that we live in. Take one piece out and the whole thing falls apart. So I will there's so many things that David is associated with, but he's in the shark conservation, what's the organization?
I'm Arizona State University is where I am these days.
Right.
With the Arizona State University actually has a Washington DC campus that focuses on science and environment policy. And I also teach marine biology to Arizona State undergraduates there.
And now he's coming to teach you. So let's give Dr. Schiffman a great welcome here at the Natural History Society of Minnesota.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today. This is my first back live and in-person talk since all this started. I've been doing a lot of this over Zoom, but I miss being able to see people's faces. I say right as the lights go out and I can't see them. So I'm excited to talk with you today about a summary of sort of the science and policy behind how we know sharks are in trouble, why that's bad, what we can do about it. This is much of the subject is going to be in my upcoming book, also called Why Sharks Matter. It is available for pre-order now, but it doesn't come out until next May. I'm happy to share information about that later. But I also encourage you, if you want to learn more about all this stuff and how you can help and how you can get involved and what's going on in the world of shark science and conservation, to follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all at Why Sharks Matter. I also have an email that's whysharksmatter@gmail.com. And I saw some folks taking notes during Nick's talk. You do not need to take notes during my talk. I have all of the notes and links and everything organized on my website. If you go to the seminar notes tab, my website is davidschiffmancv.com. I will note that it is currently undergoing renovations, but by the end of this coming week, it should be up again. You can also find copies of all of my peer-reviewed scientific publications and relevant summaries and media coverage of all of that there. So today I want to talk to you about something I've been excited to talk about since I was younger than the youngest kid that's in the audience today, and that's sharks and why they're awesome. I want to do some myth busting. Sharks are the subtitle of my book, Why Sharks Matter, refers to them being the world's most misunderstood predator. A lot of people think they know things about sharks. I don't have to start my talks with this is what a shark is, because everyone already knows that, but a lot of what you know is not quite right in ways that are potentially problematic for shark conservation. I want to talk about some shark science. I want to talk about why we're better off with healthy shark populations off our coast than we are without them. I want to talk about why sharks are in trouble and how we know, and some things that are being done to help them. Throughout this talk, there will be lots of opportunities for myth busting. I will, by request, I have a little bit in there about some local shark species that we have off the coast of Maryland and Virginia and in the Chesapeake. By request, I have a little bit of information in there for the younger folks in the audience about how to pursue a career in marine biology. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has, but I ask that you please hold that to the end. And if we don't get to your questions for whatever reason, On my social media, I do Ask Me Anything sessions every week, and I'm always happy to answer any questions that anyone has there. So sharks are a really amazing and ancient and diverse group of organisms. That's a megalodon jaw, with me wearing a shirt with megalodon jaws on it. At an aquarium in South Africa, there's a similar display set up out there. I love these things. They're just awe-inspiring. But sharks themselves are pretty cool and have been around a really long time. In fact, there were sharks swimming in the ocean long before there were dinosaurs on land, before there were even trees or flowering plants on land. They're also way older than the rings of Saturn. So this is a really ancient group of animals, which is pretty important to keep in mind when you think about all the conservation challenges they faced in my lifetime. And I am not that old, though I have a birthday coming up, so I think I'm older than I am. Sharks are, this is a question I get a lot. Are sharks mammals? Are sharks reptiles? Are sharks fish? Are they their own weird thing? They are fish. Sharks are fish, but they are a different group of fish from something like a tuna or a goldfish or a bass. Those are called the osteichthyes or bony fish. Sharks are called, or are the chondrichthyes, which means cartilaginous fish. Let me briefly explain what that means. I want everyone to hold out your arm in front of your face. Pick a point about halfway between your wrist and your elbow. Try to bend your arm there. Don't try too hard. You should find that your arm does not bend at that point. That's bone. Now, crinkle your ears. Feel how flexible that is? That's cartilage. That's what sharks' entire bodies are made out of. And that is the main delineation between the bony fishes and the sharks and their relatives. The advantage of cartilage is it's lighter and it heals faster and it's more flexible, but it is also somewhat less durable and tough. There are a lot of species of sharks. There are, as of the latest issue of Sharks of the World, which is a guidebook similar to the guidebooks that are for sale in the gift shop there are 536 known species, though some people say the number is slightly higher than that. And they come in just about every shape, size, and color and habitat you can imagine. I'm going to go through some of my favorite weird and wonderful species here, just to give you a sense of how diverse this ancient group of animals is. In the center here, that's called an angular rough shark. You think of some sharks as being really, really streamlined and powerful swimmers and built for speed. Not so with this guy. This is basically an overinflated football with oversized fins glued to it. And they are not the most hydrodynamic species known. In the lower left here, you have the megamouth shark, which is different from the megalodon. The megamouth shark, unlike the megalodon, is still alive. But megamouth sharks are a deep sea species. They have glow in the dark gums. So fish investigate, hey, what's that light? And swim right into their mouths. They also have what I think is the coolest scientific name of any fish in the ocean. And their scientific name is Megachasma pelagios, which translates to giant mouth of the deep. If you look at all these amazing displays and the scientific names there, and if you look at what they translate to, they're often things like the brown shell with the red spot. So by scientific standards, this is basically poetry. In the lower right here, that's the American pocket shark. It's not called that because it's small enough to fit in your pocket, though it is. It's called that because it has a pocket of flesh behind its head that's full of glow-in-the-dark liquid that it can squirt out to freak out predators. On the top center, that's a frilled shark, which swims almost like a snake. So there's just an enormous variety of sharks. They're found under the Arctic ice, as we just learned about. They're found in coral reefs. They're found in the deep sea, where it's so dark that sunlight never reaches. Some are spotted, some are striped, some are bubblegum pink in coloration. The goblin shark can be bright pink. So I want to take you through some of my favorite shark species before we get into some of the broader issues facing sharks. One is the river sharks. If you're a regular watcher of Shark Week, you may have heard the phrase bull sharks are the only species of sharks that can enter fresh water. Nonsense. It's not true. There are lots of species of sharks that can enter fresh water. And there is, in fact, an entire genus of sharks, the glyphis sharks, that live almost their whole lives in fresh water. And these are found in Southeast Asia and Northern Australia, that part of the world. They're unfortunately critically endangered. I'd invite you to check out my monthly column in Scuba Diving Magazine, which, among other things, has highlighted some really cool species of sharks that you might not be familiar with. There are also thresher sharks. Good, the video seems to be working great here. These are species of sharks that have a tail that's almost as large as the rest of their body combined, which they use as a whip, as you see in this video. It makes a shockwave that stuns prey that they can just go casually munch on. Hammerhead sharks were a species that I worked on a lot during my PhD research in Florida. They have that amazingly weird head shape, and they use that for a few different things. One is, as you see here, they can chase down a stingray and can pin it to the bottom and munch on it while it can't get away. They also use it as extra surface area for their electrosensory system, which we'll go more about later. But if you've ever been to the beach and seen someone sweeping a metal detector across the sand, you might see hammerheads doing basically this exact same behavior. They have the ability to tell that a prey animal is there, even if they can't see it or hear it or smell it, because they can sense the electricity given off by its beating heart. The shape on the edges of the hammerhead's hammer are also useful for making really, really sharp turns and for generating lift as they swim. There are also basking sharks, which we heard a little bit about in Nick's talk. These are a super cool species that were something that I looked at a little bit during some of my postdoctoral research in British Columbia. They are the second largest fish on Earth. If you look, that's an adult human next to one. They are filter feeders like the whale sharks and like the great whales. They are unfortunately a species of serious conservation concern. They were the first ocean fish species listed under the Species at Risk Act, which is the Canadian version of the Endangered Species Act. And that's because this giant fish that swims around with its mouth open, it's got to be eating all our salmon, right? Let's kill them. Nope, they eat plankton. So the Canadian government paid boats to drive around with these underwater spears and killed thousands of these animals that are now endangered because of a basic misunderstanding of biology. We heard all about Greenland sharks in the last talk, but I do always include them because I think they're a weird and wonderful species that doesn't get enough attention. But some things that are truly bananas about Greenland sharks, they have been found with polar bears and reindeer in their stomachs. Polar bears are the largest land predator on Earth. They're bigger than lions, they're bigger than tigers, they're the biggest bear. And Greenland sharks eat them, which is just wild. They've also been found with reindeer antlers in their stomachs. They are also the slowest swimming large fish ever measured. This video is not slowed down. This has to do perhaps with their low metabolism, living in cold water. Maybe it's part of why they live so long, but they are just incredibly slow species. They were fun to talk about in my Sport Diver magazine column, Ask a Marine Biologist, where people can write in with questions. Someone asked, are there any fish that are as bad at swimming as humans are? We hear all about the super athletes of the ocean, but what about the couch potatoes of the ocean? So I got to talk about mola molas and the Greenland shark. There are also goblin sharks. These are the ones that can be bright pink. That is slowed down. It's slowed down a lot. You wouldn't be able to see it otherwise. Lots of species of fish and also some snakes can hyperextend their jaws like that, jutting them forward, but none do it as far or as fast or as wide as the goblin shark. And that snout that you see on top there is used similar to hammerhead's hammer. It's extra sensory systems. But it was described by a very serious scientist who I interviewed for this column as, quote, floppier than you might expect. Not words that you expect to hear from some of the folks that I interview for these things. And then there are sandbar sharks, which are my favorite shark. But those of you who saw me earlier, there's a sandbar shark on my mask. There was not a sandbar shark mask available for sale anywhere in the world, so I made my own. These are the animals that I studied during my master's degree. So they are not the first shark I ever saw, but they're the first shark I ever saw a lot of. They also have played really important roles in human understanding of the ocean because of institutions like the Virginia Institute of Marine Science at William and Mary, which have been studying sharks longer than just about any other institution in the United States. And sandbar sharks are very, very common species in the Chesapeake. I am actively working on a sandbar shark research project right now with someone who's in your audience here from the National Aquarium. So stay tuned, and if you follow me on social media, you'll hear more about that probably later this year. So what sharks are found near us here in Maryland, in the DC area, in Virginia? So in the upper left here, you have a sandbar shark. They are the lower Chesapeake is a huge sandbar shark nursery. We also have bull sharks. Bull sharks have been found inside what's now the boundaries of the Beltway, though not in over 100 years, but they do catch bull sharks in the Potomac all the time. That is a dusky shark in the lower right, the source of a very serious conservation challenge off the coast, as dusky sharks are an endangered species that are commonly caught as bycatch by some of our fisheries here. And in the upper right, that's a spiny dogfish. We get lots of spiny dogfish off our coasts. So there are lots of sharks in the area. The Chesapeake is a major shark nursery area, and off the coasts there's migratory corridors as well as year-round habitat for lots of species. So we do have lots of sharks here. So let's go back to those shark senses I was talking about. Sharks have all the senses that we have. They can see, they can hear, they can taste, they can touch, they can smell, and they can do most of those things better than we can, or as well. But they also have another sense that we don't have, and that's this ability to sense bioelectric fields or electromagnetic fields in general. That means they can detect prey that's hiding, even if they can't see it, hear it, or smell it. But it also means they can navigate in the open ocean using the Earth's magnetic fields. If you've ever been on a boat so far from shore that you can't see land, how do you figure out where you are? We use GPS, but sharks don't have GPS, and they certainly don't have street signs or landmarks. So they navigate using the magnetic field. Talk about where baby sharks come from. Some sharks give live birth. This is a lemon shark giving live birth. That lemon shark, as soon as it's born, it has to be able to take care of itself because sharks don't have any parental care at all. Some species lay eggs. As you see here, this is a skate egg case with the top cut off so you can see clearly what's going on inside. Some have a weird mix of this that's only found in sharks and snakes, where the animals grow up inside eggs, but the eggs are still inside the mom and then hatch and they're born as if live birth. Some species can self-clone. If a mommy shark wants to have babies and there's not a suitable daddy around, she can get pregnant. And instead of the babies being a mix of the DNA of the mom and the dad, they're just an exact copy of the mom. Some sharks can store sperm after a mating event. A female shark can mate and say, you know what, now it's not really a great time for me to get pregnant. I got a lot going on. And she can just store the sperm and then later decide to become pregnant. The record for this is 4 years. Unfortunately, where baby sharks come from is tied to something called their K-selected life history. What that means is they have relatively few babies, relatively late in life, relatively not often. And all that combined means their populations, if they get hammered, if they get fished, if they become endangered species, they don't have the biology that lets their population bounce back quickly. That means they are inherently very, very vulnerable to overfishing pressure, and it means they have to be managed very carefully. As part of my day job, I've been reading about some older fisheries management plans that were used for sharks, and they refer to shark spawning events. And sharks do not spawn, tuna spawn, which is why we're able to catch a lot of tuna. Their populations can recover really quickly because they spawn. Sharks do not. They have, with all of this, those varieties of shark reproductive styles, they always have internal fertilization. That means at some point the babies are inside the mom, which is not the case with spawning. I want to talk now about how sharks are not a threat to humans. These are some memes that amuse me about this, and also some an example of a needlessly scary news story that you will see all the time in a way that I modified it. A lot of news stories that appear about sharks that seem, oh my God, there was a shark seen by this popular beach, it must be so scary. That's where sharks are supposed to be. Sharks live near the beach is another way of saying in the ocean, and that is where sharks live. Fish seen in water is not a breaking news event. If you see a fish going down Main Street, give me a call. But this is not something that needs to be a news event. In fact, while sharks biting people is always major news and scares people, in a typical year in the United States, and who knows when we'll ever have a typical year again, but in a typical year in the United States, more people are killed by flower pots falling on their head from above than are killed by sharks. Watching some of my neighbors in my apartment complex set up gardens during quarantine, I think that number may be about to go up. Vending machines kill way more people than sharks do. Those things are death traps, and they're in every school in America. My favorite as a social media guy, more people die in a typical year falling off cliffs while not paying attention, taking a selfie of the beautiful scenery than are killed by sharks. Now, I want to be clear that sharks do occasionally hurt people and do even more rarely than that kill people. And any human death or injury is a tragedy. But you have to keep in mind the relative risk of this stuff when we're deciding on an appropriate policy response. And the benefits of sharks greatly outweigh the very, 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 very small risks of having sharks. We are better off with healthy shark populations off our coasts than we are without them. And I want to talk about a little bit about why that is. This is my favorite food web diagram, and you know you're a normal, healthy, well-adjusted person when you have a favorite food web diagram. But every one of these rectangles represents a species of fish or invertebrate or bird or marine mammal or shark. And the lines are how they interact with each other. And the reason why this is my favorite food web diagram is the caption for it is, this is called a simplified food web diagram of the Northwest Atlantic. The food webs are really, really, really complicated is the point here. But overall, predators help keep the food chain in balance. We want predators there or else the food chain grows out of control. There's something called predation release, which occurs when the top predators are removed from the food chain, and then prey that were previously kept under control by predators can just explode. I'm from Western Pennsylvania. We used to have wolves and mountain lions in Western Pennsylvania. About 100 years ago, we killed the last of them, and now we have too many deer. And there's not enough space for all the deer, and there's not enough food for all the deer, so they're all malnourished, and they go into people's yards when they ordinarily would stay in the forest, and they spread things like Lyme disease to humans. Predators help keep food chains in balance, and when you lose predators, it can have all sorts of effects. Sometimes the ripple effects through the food chain don't stop one step of the food chain down. When it goes all the way through the food chain, it's called a trophic cascade. A step of a food web is called a trophic level. Trophic cascades are very, very bad, and we do not want them to happen. And basically, they can have all sorts of unpredictable and devastating effects on the ecosystem. And when we're talking about the ocean, this is an ecosystem that provides food for billions of humans. We very much do not want that food chain to be disrupted. There's also something called fear ecology, which is a really neat concept. And basically, the mere presence or likely presence of predators causes prey animals to change their behavior. And this can have even greater impacts than actually eating prey animals. If you've ever taken the long way to get back to your car rather than cut through a dimly lit alley at night, that's fear ecology in action. You're expending more energy and doing a different pattern because of the possibility of some sort of bad event befalling you. And this means that entire populations of herbivores, of grazing fish, or things like dugongs or sea turtles, will stay away from a seagrass bed because there might be sharks there. And that makes the seagrass bed really important in storing carbon dioxide as well as other things. Whenever we're talking about sharks in the food chain, I always love to point out some of these pictures that show that sharks are not always the top of the food chain. There are an enormous variety of sizes and shapes of sharks. There's nothing in the ocean that can take out an orca. Orcas take on great whites and win. That is a bonnethead shark pup being taken out by an osprey, I think. You always think of the great whites of South Africa taking out seals. Seals also kill blue sharks there, and crocodiles take out bull sharks all the time. So sharks play a variety of ecological roles, including some that most people don't usually think of. This is some of my research. I interviewed all the shark conservation nonprofits in the English-speaking world and asked them a variety of questions. This paper actually comes out next week in the journal Scientific Reports. It's open access, which means you don't need to work for a university in order to be able to read it. But I'll be sharing an update on it on my social media later this week. But I asked these nonprofit employees, among other things, why do you say we should save sharks? I'm trying to understand why nonprofits think sharks are important. And this idea that sharks are important to a healthy ecosystem, and when we lose sharks, it's bad for the ecosystem, is by far the most commonly used argument by environmental nonprofit groups to protect sharks. So this is not just me as an ecologist thinking that sharks are neat. This is something that has real world impact. So an example of trophic cascades, and I'll go through this example, but don't take any notes on it because as you'll see in a minute, it's wrong. But it is a very high profile example of a trophic cascade that happened not far from here. So this trophic cascade, let me orient you here. Each row is a different step on the food chain. So the things on the top eat the things on the middle, which eat the things on the bottom. You see declines on the things on the top. from left to right, the line is going down. We are losing great sharks. We are losing the large sharks. And this led to, among other things, prey of those animals increasing. But what do those animals then eat? Things below them on the food chain, among other things, bay scallops, which are part of a really important fishery off the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So the argument here was that the loss of sharks led to more cow-nose rays, which led to the collapse of the scallop fishery in the Outer Banks. Turns out that's not really true, but I bring this up both because it's a local example and it's one that you hear a lot. This paper is the most thorough debunking of anything I've ever read, and it's a very entertaining reading style. But basically, there's a few problems with this argument. One, shark populations haven't declined as much as that paper said. Two, cow-nose ray populations haven't increased as much as that paper said. And also, cow-nose rays don't really eat scallops. But other than that, it's a great argument. But this myth caused real harm, which some of you may have heard of. It led to the Save the Bay, Eat a Chesapeake Ray campaign. They tried to rebrand cow-nose rays as Chesapeake rays, and there were fishing tournaments organized in Maryland and Virginia, which used bow and arrows with exploding tip arrows, which, as I'm an angler, that doesn't strike me as an especially sporting way of catching food. But the argument was supposed to be sharks are important. When we lose sharks, it can have all sorts of unintended consequences. But the argument that some people heard is, oh my God, the cow-nose rays are out of control. We got to kill all the cow-nose rays. So this was trouble. All right, so I now want to talk a little bit about why sharks are important economically. This is distinct from the role they play in keeping food chains in balance. And I'm going to talk a little bit about wildlife tourism, which is crazy people like me who on vacation want to go swimming with sharks instead of just sitting on the beach sipping Mai Tais. There are hundreds of shark diving operations around the world. This has led to the argument made by some environmental nonprofit groups that sharks are worth more alive than dead. What this means is if a fisherman kills a shark, they'll get money for that shark once. But if there's a healthy population of sharks off the coasts, it'll invite tourists who want to swim at those sharks, and they'll stay in the hotels and they'll eat at the local restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. I mentioned the danger of selfies earlier. This is the only selfie I've ever taken with a shark in the background. You can't really see the shark. There it is. But this was in South Africa at a place known for having sand tiger sharks, which are a species we also do have here. I share this not because I am anyone's award-winning photographer. We just had a great talk from someone who is actually good at taking pictures, unlike me. But I share this as an example of what it looks like to be at a respectful distance from sharks, which lots of people, if you look at Instagram these days, are not. So this idea of sharks being worth more alive than dead, it is actually true in some cases, but it is notably not true anywhere where there's a significant shark fishery in place. So sharks are worth more to the scuba industry than they are to the fishing industry is really only true when there isn't a fishing industry. Another important point here is that who it's worth more money to. In many cases, especially in the Bahamas, which is the global epicenter of the shark diving industry, the people who lost money as a result of the Bahamas banning shark fishing are not the people who are gaining money as a result of people coming in to go scuba diving. A lot of the Bahamas shark diving industry is run off of liveaboard boats that leave from Florida and they never set foot on land in the Bahamas. And another important point here is that the species that you see when you go scuba diving with sharks are not the most critically endangered species most of the time. So, and the most critically endangered species often are in the open ocean or in the deep sea, places where scuba divers can't really go, or their populations are so low because they're critically endangered that you can't build a business around the chance of maybe seeing them. So this argument is overused and oversimplified. So I want to talk now about what's really going on with the state of global shark conservation. So sharks really are in big trouble. This number is about to get a big update from the IUCN Red List, and I can't tell you the new number, but I can tell you it's worse. But currently, the number of species listed as threatened with extinction is about 24% of all known species of sharks, which is a lot. That is really bad news for sharks. And overfishing, which is fishermen taking too many fish, is the biggest threat by far. Climate change is a huge threat to many marine species, not really that big of a deal to sharks. Plastic pollution, huge threat to many marine species, not really that big of a deal to sharks. Overfishing, biggest threat by far. There's so much that there's not really a number 2. When you hear about threats to sharks, you often hear about shark fins and shark finning and shark fin soup. There was a really interesting discussion on Twitter just this morning about this narrative and how it is deeply problematic, both factually and in terms of perpetuating anti-Asian racism. A lot of the people who engage in these arguments are not especially well informed about the current state of these facts. And this idea that sharks are in trouble because of those people over there and I didn't do anything and I shouldn't have to change anything, that's really not how anything in global conservation works anymore. We are in one society and our choices matter, and just blaming someone else somewhere else is not the answer. I know everyone's favorite part of attending an academic rant lecture is a defining term, but it's really important that a lot of people also use the term shark finning wrong. Let me back up and tell you what this word does mean in case there are some of you who are unfamiliar with it. This is a specific fishing practice in which fishermen will catch a shark, cut its fins off, and dump the body of the shark overboard, where it will slowly bleed to death or drown. This is done because the fins of the shark per pound are more valuable than the meat for most species. This is inhumane, it's unsustainable, and it has been widely condemned. It's also been illegal in the United States since 1994. That latter point is really important because several times a year, there's some big petition started up by someone on social media that says we need to ban shark finning in the United States. We did before you were born. So that is not harmless. That dilutes the limited resources of the conservation movement while spreading misinformation, and it takes attention away from real issues that could really use help. Related to that, a key part of the definition is dumping the body overboard. If the body of the shark makes it to land, that shark has not been finned, even if the fins are later removed and sold. That is just what the word means, and it is always what the word has meant. So I always see pictures like this one that go viral with hashtag stop shark finning. That's not shark finning. Stopping shark finning would not stop that. This is overfishing. There are 2 different endangered species of sharks that are dead in that parking lot outside a marina. This is bad. We should do something about this. But if you just say stop shark finning, that's not shark finning. Shark finning would not stop that. Related to this, shark finning has significantly declined as a global threat to sharks over the last 25 years, in some part due to environmental activism, but also probably the biggest factor influencing this was the government of China cutting down on luxury items at government banquets, which is not, I'm not sure I'd call that an environmental success story, but it's certainly been good for sharks. Over this same time period, the quantity of shark meat being traded around the world has risen substantially. I have talked to many people who consider themselves ocean conservation activists who are horrified at the idea of shark finning and shark fin soup, but have never even heard that people eat shark meat. My parents live in Florida. At the Publix grocery store right around the corner from their house, there were 3 kinds of shark meat for sale at the seafood counter. This is not a rare or far away thing. I will note that there are some well-managed sustainable shark fisheries, and that doesn't bother me, but there are some that are not, and that does bother me. So this is a photo that I took at my parents' grocery store. So shark finning and the shark fin trade are not the only major threat to sharks, and when people talk about them as if they are, that takes resources away from ongoing conservation campaigns that could really use our help. You can be forgiven for not knowing that. With another paper that I published, I guess last year now, it's hard to tell time, this last 18 months, everybody. But I think, yes, this paper was the year 2020. We looked at how global shark conservation issues were portrayed in the newspapers around the world, in the English-speaking world. And we found that shark finning and the shark fin trade were mentioned in newspaper articles 5 times as often as the shark meat trade was mentioned. And 90% of the shark meat trade articles, they said there's no such thing as the shark meat trade. People only kill sharks for their fins. And that hasn't been true in 30 years. So this is a problem. So now I want to talk a little bit about some of the different policy solutions that are available to protect sharks. And this gets into ways of how you can help. This is something that always surprises people who attend my talks, who consider themselves very, very knowledgeable about the state of ocean conservation because they haven't heard of any of this. If I were to give this talk at an academic conference with other shark scientists, they would wonder why I was wasting time saying things as obvious as this. So this is a case where social media has amplified wrong information in ways that are deeply harmful for public understanding of this problem. So sharks are in trouble. There are lots of ways we can help them. In recent years, there's been intense public interest in how to protect sharks, which is great, but increasingly heated debate and also some significant public misunderstandings. There has been some discussion of focusing on especially famous species like great whites, a lot of focus on shark fin soup, as was mentioned earlier, some very flashy, dramatic protests. This woman painted herself silver, put fish hooks through her back, and hung herself outside of a fish market in Hong Kong to protest overfishing. I'm sure you'll be shocked to learn that overfishing continues after that protest. There's a growing number of people that are pushing for more sustainable fisheries. If the problem is unsustainable fishing, then we should make the fishing more sustainable, not give it up entirely. And this one is a fake bumper sticker that a friend of mine made for me when I said I don't trust any solution that's complicated or that's simple enough to fit on a bumper sticker. So this comes from an article of mine that I did during my PhD. It's written in the journal Animal Conservation, which is also open access. It's intentionally written so you don't need to have a PhD in environmental policy to understand it. And it's meant to be a guide to the different tools that are out there. And it's called Shark Conservation and Management Policy, a Review and Primer for Non-Specialists. Basically, there are two main families of policies, and they're divided by whether or not we should allow any shark fishing at all. If the answer is yes, we should have some shark fishing, but don't overfish, then that gets into the target-based tools. And those aim to maximize sustainable fisheries exploitation while not allowing overfishing. And if you've ever been fishing for anything, you recognize some of these tools. There are limits on how big the animal has to be, how many you can catch, things like this. This is basic fisheries science stuff. In recent years, there's been a push towards these newer limit-based policy tools. And these aim to say, it doesn't matter if there are some sustainable shark fisheries. Some shark fisheries are bad. We should stop all shark fishing entirely anywhere. And these are things like no-take marine protected areas, shark sanctuaries, which you may have heard of in the news, and shark fin trade bans, which are still being actively discussed in Washington, D.C. ocean policy circles. So this is an old argument with somewhat of a new example. If anyone's ever taken any U.S. environmental history courses or read about this, we used to have this big argument in the U.S. between John Muir and Gifford Pinchot about what we should do about managing wilderness and protected spaces in the United States. With one side pushing for sustainable management of forests and things like that, and one side pushing for totally untouched national parks. And we ended up doing both. There are few, at least in the United States, who would disagree that anchovies are a natural resource that we should sustainably exploit. The great whales are wilderness and they should be preserved and not exploited, even if it can be done sustainably. But sharks sort of fall awkwardly in the middle here, where there are absolutely shark fisheries, including in Maryland. But a lot of people think that the sharks are wildlife and should be preserved and not a natural resource to be exploited. So this is a fascinating space for me as an academic to be working in. So, excuse me, support for these target-based policies, the sustainable fishing, is tied to beliefs that sustainable shark fisheries can and do exist, and that there's some benefit to people and or sharks found with these that's not found with total bans. And I'll tell you that sustainable shark fisheries can and do exist. That is an incontrovertible scientific fact. That doesn't mean we should do it, but people who say we shouldn't do it often say we shouldn't do it because it's not possible, and that's not true. This is a paper written by my former postdoctoral supervisor, Nick Dolby, called Bright Spots of Sustainable Shark Fishing. The different dots on the map are scientifically identified by sustainable shark fisheries. You'll notice that there are, in fact, dots on the map. Those dots exist. Sustainable shark fisheries exist. I interviewed during my PhD all of the shark scientists, and I asked them a variety of questions, one of which was, do you think we should ban, or what should the future direction of shark conservation be? Should we try to ban shark fishing, or should we try to make it more sustainable? 90% agree we should try to make it more sustainable. 83% believe that sustainable shark fisheries can exist, 78% believe that they do exist. In contrast, support for some of these newer policies, these limit-based policies, is tied to personal values, which may or may not be cultural in nature. Some South Pacific cultures consider sharks to be the reincarnated spirits of ancestors who died at sea or things like that. Or there are just some people who will say things like, I love sharks. I don't want to see any shark hurt ever. I don't care if it's for a sustainable fishery. And I'll note that there's nothing wrong with this point of view. It's not the point of view that I share or most scientists share or what US environmental law is based on, but this is fine. The problem is there are people who say sustainable shark fisheries cannot and do not exist, and therefore we have to ban everything. And that is misrepresenting the state of the science, and that is a problem. There are also, I want to highlight a couple flashy examples here as I wrap up here, and I want to make sure to leave you with plenty of time for questions. There is something called a consumer boycott, which I have categorized not as target-based or limit-based, but as other, its own little weird thing. These take the form of a well-known, often beloved brand like Shake Shack or Starbucks that has a very, 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 very tenuous connection to shark conservation, that one small nonprofit claims they play a bigger role than they do, and they make these very dramatic graphics and stage flashy protests. These get more media coverage than all sustainable fisheries management tools combined. You may be wondering, for example, what does Starbucks have to do with shark conservation? And I will tell you what I mean by very, 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 very tenuous. Starbucks, when they want to sell their product in Southeast Asia, like literally everyone else does, they go through a food importer, exporter, distributor that's based there. That food importer, exporter, distributor is owned by a holding company, which is owned by another holding company. That other holding company owns a restaurant that serves shark fin soup. That's it. I swear to God, that is why Starbucks is being slammed for killing sharks. So this is not a particularly fact-based, evidence-based, data-driven conservation policy solution. Though I will note that a 2014 consumer boycott of an Atlantic City hotel chain that was selling shark fin soup at the time, I was responsible for these, I swear to God, real tweets. Sharks are last on my list other than the losers or haters of the world. That is a real thing that happened. So what can you do to help? At this point, you've learned that sharks are amazing. They're not a threat to you. We're better off with healthy shark populations than we are without them. Some are in trouble, and there are a lot of things that can be done to help. So what can you do to help? Submit public comments to NOAA, which is our national level natural resource management agency that deals with fisheries. Several times a year, there's an issue that comes up that they're considering revising some sort of ocean conservation plan, and they need citizens to write in and say, hey, don't do that, or hey, do that. I share these on my social media whenever these opportunities arise. It's really, really, really important that when you write into things like that, you don't just say things like save the sharks, but you say things like I oppose Amendment 17B and instead support Amendment 3C. And there's no way you would know that, which is why I share expert perspectives on my social media. If you want to help, this is the best thing you can do to help. My friends at NOAA have told me that 5 public comments written in by members of the community mean more than 5,000 signatures on one of those goofy change.org petitions. So follow me on social media. Several times a year, I share ways that you can help. I also want to note, since I know there are some scuba divers in the room, there is a fringe movement in the scuba community that believes that they are helping and they are not. This is one of these goofy stop shark finning in Florida petition, got almost 150,000 signatures on it. Shark finning was banned in Florida in 1994. This petition was last year. There are people who grab sharks and hug sharks and kiss sharks and ride sharks and believe that they are somehow helping. Let me assure you that they are not. There's also a really vocal movement on social media of people who attack scientists and seem to believe that sharks would not be in trouble if only scientists would leave them alone. This is not true and not helpful. So I want to stress here that wanting to help is wonderful. Trying to help is wonderful. Neither of those are the same thing as actually helping. And good intentions do not excuse easily foreseeable harms. We have a whole cliche about this, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So if you want to help, don't reinvent the wheel poorly on your own. Ask an expert what's going on and how I can help. And I, for one, am always available for questions like that. I want to note here some information about a career in marine biology for some of the younger members of our audience. I know that there was someone here who's about to start a marine biology major in the fall in a few weeks. That's awesome. There are a huge variety of jobs that are available in this field that are fascinating. This is what I wanted to do since I was 3 years old, and I love every day. This is a career that is almost certainly going to require some graduate school, which is college after college. My dad joked at our wedding rehearsal dinner that at the time I was in 25th grade, and I hadn't thought of it that way, but he was right. So it's a lot of school, it's a lot of learning, but scientists love learning, and if you have that natural curiosity and want to learn more about the world, could be a great career for you. As you saw in our last talk, it can include wonderful travel opportunities and amazing adventures, but there's also some really great people that I get to meet, and I personally still love sharks just as much now, and every time I see one, as I did when I first saw my first shark when I was 4 or 5 years old at the Pittsburgh Aquarium. So I want to close here with my favorite quote. This was written by a Senegalese conservationist talking about gorillas named Baba Dayoum. And he said, "In the end, we'll conserve only what we love will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught." I hope that I've taught you a little bit something today, and even if you don't love sharks as much as I do, I hope you understand a little bit more about them. I thank you very much for listening. I am Why Sharks Matter on every service you can imagine, including that's my Gmail. I will leave some business cards up here if people need to get a hold of me. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
That is wonderful. Oh, here we go.
See how many people fell asleep. Not zero. Cool.
No, they're up. They're up. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes.
What makes for a good shark nursery?
What makes for a good shark nursery? That's a great question. We actually just had a paper published a few weeks ago where we identified the first shark nursery area for critically endangered great hammerhead sharks in the Atlantic coast of the US. That this was written up in the Washington Post last week. But a shark nursery, that's a part of the ocean that's really special. And it's where baby sharks grow up and get big and strong before they can go out into the open ocean. And they tend to be shallow, so big predators can't get in there. They tend to be really, really productive, so there's lots of food, and there's usually lots of hiding spaces. So these are some parts of the ocean, we consider them to be biological deserts. There's just not a lot happening there. This is not that. This is the opposite of that. So good shark nurseries are shallow and usually close to a river mouth or some source of nutrients, and usually quite warm.
Yeah, Brad.
To volunteer today, I've been out of education since 2007. Although I do stuff like this for here and another
Wonderful.
nature center. But the bottom line was, one of the trivial things I found today was more people die from coconuts hitting in the head in the world than are killed by sharks. So
Those things, palm trees are death traps. Don't fall asleep on one of those things. So this is actually it's actually kind of a problem that a lot of people think that shark bites are much more common than they are. Because it makes, when I, at some public talks that I've given, certainly not with an audience like this one, but I give talks to fishing clubs, I give talks to just members of the community or at the library or things like that. And if anyone has another group that they represent that you think might be interested, my cards are up here. But there are people who, when I say 24% of all known species of sharks are endangered, they say, oh, good, what can we do to get 100% of them endangered? Because sharks are scary and bad. And part of that is the media coverage that makes people think that sharks are, if you dip your toe in the bathtub, a shark's going to eat your whole family, and it's just not the case. An amazing study that a colleague of mine named Christopher Neff did, they looked into the source of the actual incident behind shark bite headlines around the world, and in something like 35 or 40% of the shark attack headlines in Australia, the shark did not physically touch the person; it swam near them in a way the person thought was threatening. But when you hear shark attack, you think Jaws. You think a monster stalking the coast, killing people because it's evil, and that's not what sharks do. So yeah, these relative risk statistics are always amusing, but they highlight a real problem in public misunderstanding of these issues. Yeah, thank you.
We have a question from Zoomland.
Hi, Zoomland.
Where do crocodiles eat bull sharks? Is that Australia or Africa?
I believe that. Yeah, so the question was that photo that I showed of crocodiles eating bull sharks, where did that happen? I believe that specific photograph was taken in Australia, but that can happen anywhere. There was an American alligator that ate a nurse shark in Florida that was on the headline of the cover of Southeastern Naturalist a few years ago. So this happens all the time. But that particular photograph, I believe, was from Australia.
The same, Gabe also wants to know, do any sharks eat vegetables?
Do any sharks eat vegetables? So that's a great question that the answer to which has changed in the last couple of years. We used to think that the answer was no. But there's a species called the bonnethead shark, which is a small relative of the hammerheads that I mentioned earlier. And some studies we've always known that they get seagrass in their stomachs. But I always jokingly compared this to when I try to pick all the lettuce off my ham and cheese sandwich and don't get it all. It doesn't mean I was eating a salad. But it turns out that they actually have the ability to digest that seagrass and get nutrients from it, which is just wild. And when I saw this presented at a scientific conference, and people genuinely did not believe it. There were audible no from the audience, and which is just like not how scientific conferences usually go. They're usually not so dramatic. But yeah, that person can convince us.
Yes, ma'am.
Do I know about Bethany Hamilton? Yes, Bethany Hamilton actually follows me on Twitter. Bethany Hamilton was a professional surfer who was bitten by a shark and lost her arm. There was a movie made about her called Soul Surfer. Yeah. But she has become, this is actually surprisingly common among the very, very, very rare people that are bitten by sharks, that they become shark conservation advocates, that they say, I went into the shark's home, it's not the shark's fault, I don't blame the shark, I'm not saying we should kill all the sharks. And she still does all these amazing feats of athleticism with one arm. She was actually on the Amazing Race a few years ago and was beating the people in athletic things that had two arms. It was pretty dang impressive. But yeah, Bethany Hamilton is an interesting person. Soul Surfer is that movie.
So, Dave, you mentioned 3 types of shark meat that you see at Publix. I've seen it here in Maryland. I've eaten shark meat, and it's quite good, actually. Tastes like veal. Good. Good chicken. Which species are we talking about, though? I didn't know what species we get here, but down there, for example, do you know what species this is?
Yeah, the species that they had that time that I was there and saw 3 is blacktip, which they always have, and we have the blacktips here as well. Shortfin mako, that's a conservation problem, and thresher, which was found. It was from California and imported to Florida, and it's okay but not great. But blacktips are fine. In addition to working for Arizona State, I work for a nonprofit that works on sustainable seafood issues. So without getting too much into the technical weeds here, there are absolutely some sharks that are sustainably harvested, and it doesn't bother me if people eat them. But unsustainable overfishing is definitely the #1 threat to sharks all over the world. Mako is the biggest threat or the biggest hot button issue in Washington, D.C. policy circles right now. But yeah, as far as the taste goes, have you ever noticed how like 99% of all fish is described as kind of a flaky whitefish, not too fishy? Shark is not that. So if you're a real seafood person and you like a more intense seafood flavor, you might like it. If you prefer that not too fishy, light flaky whitefish, it's not that. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Oh, wow.
Fossilized shark tooth necklace for
Lovely.
you. And I
Thanks.
don't know what species it is, but that guy in the green shirt would know. And that,
I'll bring it up to you if you bring it.
which is our segue fossil into our next speaker, which we have JP Hodnett here from the Maryland Dinosaur Park. We do have a dinosaur park and we have a state dinosaur, but we're not going to be talking about dinosaurs here because we're talking about sharks. And people said, why does the Fossil Club host a Shark Fest? That's weird. Well, sharks have been around for a very, very, very long time, 450 million years or so, way back longer than us. And fossil shark teeth are kind of known as your gateway fossil, the first ones that you find on the beach, and get you all into paleontology. So here we're going to talk, we're going to take about a 5-minute break, get the technology switched over, and we're going to learn about the Godzilla shark that JP helped to discover and find in New Mexico. So that'll be interesting. I want everybody to come back and learn about that. All righty, see you in 5 minutes. All right.